state's opening offer for one stretch of the valley was zero. Zero pumping. You're listening to the Sigma Weekly, your 10-minute briefing on everything happening in California groundwater, brought to you by water1.ai. I'm your AI host. Let's get into it. There's a grower in Kings County who put 8,000 acre-feet into the ground through a single gate behind his house. We'll get to what that means. Both of those are coming. First, some genuinely good news out of Fresno County. McMullin Area GSA, that's a groundwater sustainability agency, the local body responsible for bringing a basin into balance, got its answer on the expansion project this week. Back in early July, we flagged August 5th as the checkpoint that would decide the project's path. Well, August 5th came, and the bids came in where staff hoped they would. 8 contractors bid. Splitting the work between the two apparent low bidders comes to about $22 million, which lands inside the targeted budget range and slightly under what it would cost to hand the whole job to a single contractor. Staff are hoping to bring an award recommendation to a special meeting in about 2 weeks, and at the latest, it comes at the regular September 2nd meeting. Same meeting, a harder message. The general manager put landowners on notice that the agency will be taking, in his words, fairly aggressive collection actions in the very near future on roughly 150 wells tied to metering and registration non-compliance. Fines have been accruing on those since February 1st of 2025. If you're in that district and you're not sure where you stand, this is the week to find out rather than the week to wait. Now, that zero. Following our coverage of the state's pending interim plan for the Tule Subbasin, 2 of the Sub-basin's own agencies described the proposal from the inside this week, and it's worth hearing how they tell it. Tri-County Water Authority reported that state water board staff signaled they could impose a complete moratorium on groundwater extraction in a 2-mile swath on both sides of the Friant-Kern Canal, unless the Tule agencies produce an urgency plan of their own that gets to the same place. Porterville Irrigation District GSA was in the room for that July 16th meeting, and their account fills in the shape of it. The state's opening position was a full moratorium, and they defined moratorium as zero pumping, inside a zone whose width is still undetermined. Discussion ranged anywhere from 1 mile to 3 miles off the canal. Then the parties broke into caucus, and when they came back, state staff stepped back from the opening statement and indicated they would consider a credible alternative from the agencies. So that's where this sits. A draft interim plan expected in January, and board adoption targeted for April of 2027. Nobody has adopted anything, but an opening offer of zero tells you something about how the state is approaching this stretch of canal, and the agencies clearly heard it that way. Here's the thing that makes it harder. Porterville's staff laid out the constraint plainly. State approval is sub-basin-wide, all or none. No single agency gets approved while its neighbors fall short. Porterville's own wells run shallow. They have reliable surface water, and their monitoring shows minimal subsidence inside district boundaries, and none of that saves them on its own. That's a genuinely difficult coordination problem, and it's one every agency in that sub-basin is now working through together. Next up, a court decision that's starting to land on boards. Following last week's coverage of the Tehama County groundwater charge that the 3rd District Court of Appeals struck down as an unconstitutional tax, the ruling is now showing up in board discussions well outside Tehama. At Glen Colusa Irrigation District, a director, himself an attorney, told the board the decision means the Colusa and Glen groundwater authorities can't keep spreading administrative costs across all acreage the way they have been. Both will have to recalibrate. He said he'd been making that argument for 5 years, and that he agreed with the court. If you're running a fee process this fall, that's a case worth reading before your next hearing, rather than after it. Moving on to money, the kind with a deadline attached. San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority adopted a resolution authorizing the authority to facilitate a $25 million federal award from Reclamation to Westlands Water District for a groundwater banking project. The catch is the clock. That funding expires at the end of September. The money goes toward aquifer storage and recovery wells. Wells that push water down into the aquifer when it's available and pull it back when it isn't. The longer-term hope is that banking capacity could eventually move at least a portion of the south of Delta drought pool out of San Luis Reservoir, which would ease a real operational constraint for a lot of member agencies. Westlands already holds a general order for up to 400 of these wells and has built about 80 so far. Now, we've been tracking golden mussels for 3 weeks running, and this week the problem picked up a price tag on both sides of the ledger. Staff at San Luis and Delta Mendota reported significant buildup at the O'Neill pumping plant. Left untreated, they estimate it could reach about 4 inches of depth in a year. They're not treating it as imminent, they have a plan, but they've put a $500,000 placeholder in next fiscal year's operations and maintenance budget for the response. Up in the Delta, North Delta Water Agency's manager laid out what the state has committed: $6 million in one-time spending to cover decontamination for the entire Delta. One board member's reaction to that math was, and I quote, "Good luck covering the Delta." And there's an action item in this one. The state is folding golden mussels into its existing zebra mussel regulations, with a public meeting on the draft coming up August 18th. Last must know: the Colorado River. Following last week's note that Reclamation had released the final environmental impact statement for post-2026 Colorado River operating guidelines, 2 agencies gave their reading of it this week. Imperial Irrigation District staff reported that the document affirms what they called applicable laws, the law of the river and the priority system, in the absence of voluntary lower basin agreements. They characterized that as favorable to Imperial and to California, and they expect a record of decision within weeks. At Desert Water Agency, the Secretary-Treasurer brought back a different note from the Association Board meeting. The preferred option largely aligns with what the lower basin states proposed, but operations would be renegotiated on a 2-year cycle rather than settled long-term. There was real frustration in that room about the absence of a longer horizon. Both readings are fair. It's a good outcome on the law and an unsatisfying one on certainty. That's your must-knows. Now, trends across the valley. First trend: sub-basins are consolidating into a single voice for regulators. Southwest Kings GSA approved a consulting contract and named a single, independent, third-party point of contact for the entire Tulare Lake sub-basin. All 5 of the sub-basin's agencies are making that move, jointly holding the contract, specifically to show regulators they're coordinated. That same board heard the sub-basin has now secured at least monthly 2-hour meetings with the State Water Board, against a calendar the agencies laid out themselves for finishing the updated sustainability plan. Tri-County Water Authority, which sits in both sub-basins, approved the same appointment. That's a real shift in posture. A year ago, the conversation was about individual agencies defending individual plans. Now it's a sub-basin hiring one neutral voice and asking the regulator for a standing meeting. Second trend: everybody is getting into position for the Proposition 4 funding window, and it may open only once. Tri-County heard that draft guidelines for the full Proposition 4 SGMA solicitation should land around October, with applications due in early summer of 2027, and that only one round of funding is anticipated. Important detail: basins, not individual agencies, will be the applicants. The Northern Delta Mendota Committee heard its consultant walk through what's coming: a land repurposing program from the Department of Conservation, the Proposition 4 groundwater pot, and a watershed resilience track. They've asked members to get project concepts in by the end of September, and San Luis and Delta Mendota reported that the Department of Water Resources, DWR, has already released draft guidelines for a separate, earlier grant program with its own comment workshops next month. That is not the full solicitation Tri-County is waiting on. If you're going after this money, those 2 documents are on different clocks. Don't conflate them. Third trend: recharge capacity is what everyone is buying right now. At Kings County Water District, a grower told the board he'd sunk more than 8,000 acre-feet in 6 months through a single 30-inch gate on the ditch behind his house. The board moved to have its engineers look at the district's existing gates and pull the file on prior channel improvements. That's the kind of number that reframes what existing infrastructure might already be capable of. The West Side Sub-basin land repurposing projects we covered in July now have a construction date. Groundbreaking planned for September. Porterville is negotiating for a property near the Friant-Kern Canal it intends to turn into a recharge basin, sited to help curb subsidence. And Desert Water Agency reported roughly 100 to 12,000 acre-feet delivered to the Whitewater Sub-basin so far this year. Last trend: 2027 budgets are turning into rate conversations. Southwest Kings adopted a 2027 budget and then voted to raise its groundwater assessment from $1.50 to $2 per acre, with the board noting that consulting bills for the updated Sub-basin plan are about to start arriving. At Kings County Water District, working line by line through a draft budget, one director put it about as plainly as it can be put. "I think we're in the era where we got to increase the rates." He was pointing at equipment needs and coming regulation. And Oakdale Irrigation District voted 4-0 to send out a Proposition 218 notice for one of its improvement districts, where the rate has been flat at $20 an acre for 16 years, while a 50-year-old pipeline kept needing repairs. The public hearing is October 6th. If you farm in that improvement district, watch your mail. That notice is your window to weigh in. None of these boards is raising rates because it wants to. Every one of them is doing the same arithmetic between deferred maintenance, consultant costs, and a regulatory clock that isn't slowing down. That's your Sigma Weekly. If you want the full details on every board meeting we covered, head to water1.ai. You can read the complete recaps, and if you want to dig deeper, try Chat GSA. Just ask it anything about your district, and it'll pull up the answers from the latest meetings. I'm your AI host. Stay informed, and I'll see you next week.